Alito is just as crooked as who again? Who is he as crooked as? Oh, what's the name? What's the name? Clarence Thomas. Alito is as crooked as Clarence Thomas. How do we know? This is how we know.
An extraordinary and highly unusual back and forth between investigative reporters and Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito. A brand new report from ProPublica details how in 2008, Justice Alito took a luxury Alaska fishing trip with conservative hedge fund billionaire Paul Singer, which Alito declined to note in his financial disclosures. In the years since, ProPublica says Singer's hedge fund has repeatedly had business before the Supreme Court. Alito has never recused himself. Now, even before that story was published, Justice Alito responded in a Wall Street Journal op-ed saying he followed what he understood to be standard practice and that he was under no obligation to recuse himself in any cases connected to Singer. NBC Supreme Court reporter Lawrence Hurley is following this story for us, also with me, criminal defense attorney and MSNBC legal analyst Danny Savallo. So, Lawrence, what else did we learn from the ProPublica reporting, and how is Justice Alito responding?
Yeah, so there's two key claims made in the story. One is that Justice Alito should have disclosed this trip on a private jet that he took to Alaska for this fishing trip back in 2008. And then the second thing is that he should have recused from these cases involving Singer's company that were before the Supreme Court in the years after this trip. Justice Alito, in this unusual op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, rejects both those claims. He says that in terms of the disclosure, under the rules that existed at the time, he wasn't required to disclose it. That's a similar point to the one that Justice Thomas made in the similar claims about him traveling on the jet owned by another billionaire, Harlan Crow. And both the justices made that same point, that the rules that were just changed earlier this year to make it clear that you do have to disclose travel on a private jet. Back then, you didn't have to say that. And for the recusal, he says he didn't even know Singer that well. His relationship with him was very limited. His engagement with him was limited. And also that he didn't even know that Singer's companies, the Singer himself was associated with these cases that were before the Supreme Court. Although it has to be pointed out that it was widely known and reported at the time that Singer's company and his name was associated with those cases.
So at the very least, when you're talking about a flight that, and under normal circumstances, would cost $100,000 for a passenger, is there at least, Danny, the appearance of conflict here?
A Supreme Court justice is, by definition, a professional opinion writer, and a professional opinion writer on the most important opinion writing body in our country. So when this Supreme Court justice wrote an op-ed, I was ready to be persuaded. I was not persuaded. And the airfare argument was one of the weaker arguments that I think Alito made.
The seat would have been empty anyway, right? Isn't that what he said?
That's the argument. Now, number one, the law does require disclosure of private flights. Alito's argument was essentially, well, they had already made their arrangements, and this was a seat on a private jet that would have gone empty otherwise. And I struggled to come up with an analogy, but it's almost like if I drove a Ferrari up to a cliff and gently pushed it and said, well, Justice Alito, it's either going to go over the cliff or just take the Ferrari, because otherwise it's going into the crevice. It seems like that's kind of the same thing. I don't know that you can argue that a private jet flight, which everybody knows, is not just a seat on a plane. It's lobster. It's catered food. It's a delightful ride.
I do not know that, but I'm going to take your word for it.
I have no idea what it is. I have no personal knowledge, but everybody knows a private jet flight is so much more than just an empty seat that would have gone empty no matter what. And Alito describing it that way in his op-ed is tone deaf. The same way it's tone deaf, the way he describes this trip as a rustic fishing outing. You know what this was. This was a rich guy trip. You see these all the time. Going fishing, hunting, whatever it is. I haven't been on any of them. I have friends. They know who they are. They go on these trips. I don't. But they are what they are, and he needs to be honest about that. His op-ed, I had a lot of expectations out of someone who writes persuasively at the highest level, and I was not persuaded. And I think a lot of other folks weren't persuaded either.
And that is a shame. Nobody was persuaded by, look, the fact there's a certain behavior that's exhibited by too many on the right. I'm not saying the folks on the left don't do this, because they definitely do, especially the neoliberal brand. They definitely do that. But there's a certain level of in your face that these guys have a tendency to do it. Alito, when ProPublica tried to get a response from him, he just decided, I'm going to write me a damn op-ed. And I'm going to refute you with an op-ed. And for a Supreme Court justice to fail, you hear what the guy says? A Supreme Court justice is a professional opinion writer. My opinion of the Constitution is that this is what it means. And if others agree with, if I get 4 others to agree with my opinion right now, then you know what? That is what it is. That will be the interpretation of the law of the land. That's what they are. That's what they do. But then to have the wealthy, the billionaires serve you, who also are bringing cases in front of you, talking about patent corruption. And what Clarence Thomas and Alito has shown, especially, if it wasn't corrupt, you think they would have a problem disclosing it in their report? No, they wouldn't have a problem, but they know they're corrupted. They know they are corrupted. But you know what? As long as you have sycophants that allow this behavior to continue, it'll continue. What we have to do is reduce the sycophancy IQ in the United States of America. And that's what we aim to do. In the case of Politics Done Right, that's why we do 10 programs every week, with a whole lot of blogging, with a whole lot of writing to do just that. We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead. Number 1, subscribe to our channel. And number 2, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.